This is Steve Zeltzer with Work Week, and I'm with Chris Silvera this morning, who is the president of IBT Local 808 in New York and New Jersey, and he's been a leading activist in the movement to defend Black and worker rights and also for internationalism. So welcome to our show.
Hey, man, good to see you.
So, Chris, we're coming on to the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, and it seems that, in fact, the continued terrorist actions by the police, murders, there was just another one in Louisiana, has been covered up for like years
Yeah.
by the Louisiana State Police. It seems there's a real systemic cover-up of police terror, and the government's involved in it. So what are the lessons of the George Floyd murder and the movement that's risen to protest this systemic racism, and also what working people need to do to end this terrorism against Blacks, Latinos, and others?
Part of this, I believe that the labor movement has to speak up. The labor movement has to say something to make that connection. One of the things that people are not doing, people think that things happen in a vacuum. So at the same time as you are having a civil rights movement in the United States, you are having an anti-colonial movement throughout Africa and the Caribbean. And these things are happening all over the place. I just saw an article about the amount of killings that were happening in Jamaica right now, criminals shooting criminals and what have you like that. And the same thing is happening here. Gun violence is up there, gun violence is up here. And you probably could see this in multiple different countries. Now, with respect to George Floyd and that conviction does not begin to address the problem. The problem can only be addressed by dealing with the reality of these police believing that they are above the law. Truth and fact is, and I tell this to people all the time, the police is an extension, it's an arm of the state, right? So the police is, when you see them protecting the police, they're not protecting that individual police or even that department. They're protecting the state. And so that the racism which is driven in America that results in these murders and what have you, we just saw this happening in Gaza, in which Israel is shooting rockets at, defenseless people. I mean, I'm not sure about the rockets, who them guys are getting rockets from, but they need another rocket maker. But the fact is that what they have compared to Israel's arms is, it's a guy bringing a knife to a gunfight. You know what I'm saying? So that societally, we have to address how our society sees and values Black skin.
And we had a past President Trump who was the most openly racist, misogynist, xenophobic president in our lifetime, and maybe since the Civil War. And yet, what was the response of the Teamster leadership, the national AFL-CIO, to these open, flagrant racist attacks and also attacks on immigrants?
So maybe local by local, but I did not hear the uproar that we should have gotten from organized labor in addressing anything. In fact, they were having meetings with Trump on a few different occasions. Those meetings really netted them nothing, except that Trump was able to say, I met with them. But this is where organized labor now has to recognize that its most loyal members are people of color, are women. And if you're not going to step up and side with those people, then we're going to have real issues as we go forward.
And the effort to get some bills in Congress to restrain the police and maybe their limited immunity and all that kind of stuff, it seems to be going nowhere with a filibuster in the Congress. This effort to believe that you're going to change things by the Congress is a major thrust of the AFL-CIO and the Teamsters Unionist ProAct Law as well, which will face a filibuster. So where is this going? I mean, it seems like it's kind of a dead end. Emailing for the ProAct, emailing to get the Congress to do the right thing when there's a filibuster, and they don't want to really challenge that.
Right. So we have to, so labor has to make those people within the, so history again, what happens? People just simply switch parties, right? So there was a point where the Republican Party represented um, uh, some form of ideal of freedom for Black people. FDR switches that. Uh, Johnson then does a double take on that, and they all run to the Republican Party. So the Democratic Party used to be the party of the Klan. Now they have switched hands. Labor needs to start to be back in the street. And if we're not going to go in the street, if we're not going to start to affect productivity, if we're not going to start to affect the ability of corporations to make a profit, then they will never change. You have to affect the money flow. And without affecting the money flow, you are not going to make these people move because they have a vested interest. And there's too much of labor that does not understand the correlation between the death of George Floyd and the inability to pass the ProAct.
Well, this issue of business unionism in the 40s and 50s, there was a witch hunt in the United States, and leftist communist militants were driven out of the trade union movement. And you have now a support for capitalism, a labor management collaboration, business unionism, and also you have support for U.S. Military policies. In fact, the AFL-CIO gets over $30 million a year from the National Endowment for Democracy for their Solidarity Center. The AFL-CIO was involved in the support of the coup in attempted coup in Venezuela. Where's the AFL-CIO in the bombing of Gaza, on the systemic racism, apartheid state of Israel, and how they're treating the Palestinians? I mean, it seems there's complete silence by the AFL-CIO in the midst of a massacre, really, and that's what you were referring to. They, homemade rockets against the entire U.S. supported Israeli Air Force, bombing people at will.
Yeah, yeah. But even a business unionist would realize that their position is not even good for their own business, right? So if you're a business unionist, that means you're running a business. Their position is anti themselves. There is a relationship between what Netanyahu and what Israel is doing, and I want people to be very clear that we're not disparaging the religion. We're talking about the policies and politics of a government in a particular place. Israel is without question intended to be an apartheid state. The solution in that region of the world is never going to be a two-state solution, especially when the other state, for you to get to that state, you got to come through my state, and I control the gate, and I control the ins and outs and the ups and downs of whatever you do. That's not a solution. The solution is a one-state solution. And because people forget that Jews lived in Palestine in peace before 1948. People forget this, okay? It is the Zionists, okay? People need to go back and read a guy named Theodore Herzl, who is known as the father of Zionism, to see what that plan was, which led to the creation of the state of Israel. And they would actually know that they looked in Africa, they looked in South America to create this new state of Israel, but they do not want to be with other people, and that is not a sustainable outcome.
And Israel was involved, the Trade Union Federation there, the Histadrut, was involved in supporting South Africa, apartheid South Africa. U.S. unions, including the Teamsters, Fitzsimmons in the past, they were buying Israeli bonds. They still have Israeli bonds, helping the state of Israel. The leadership of the AFL-CIO and these unions say that they're Zionist. They support a Jewish state. What do you think of the idea that a union in the United States supports a religious state that discriminates against non-Jews?
Well,
it seems to be a contradiction.
It is because first of all, Zionism really would not be pro-labor, right? So if you really look at the behavior of a Zionist, it wouldn't be pro-labor. I'm sure Netanyahu is not pro-labor, right? And so, and if you as a government can support the apartheid South African government in that time, that tells me something about you, right? Even the United States supported South Africa, and we had to bring pressure to bear to get them to back off. And even when the United States backed off, Israel still kept that relationship, which it would be safe to say that the government of uh, Pick both and these people were as close to a Nazi government as you could get anywhere in the world. You know, Cecil Rhodes and that whole regime from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, and South Africa, all those guys were really, fascists. And that's never, I've never said that, I've never seen a fascist government that was pro-labor. And if labor is not careful about what it supports and what it doesn't support, this is coming back to even from a business perspective, the question as to whether you're going to be in business in a few years is going to be called into question.
And the rise of fascist movements, right-wing, openly fascistic movements in the United States. What does that mean from the point of view of American workers, and what should American workers be doing about it? Because the rise of fascism and the racist, open racist, is that a threat to the trade unions? Is that a threat to working people?
It is an absolute threat to the working class as a whole. They don't, the people don't realize that the Klan was anti-union, and that in the years when they were trying to organize in the South and whatnot, it was the Klan that came in to drive union organizers and to defeat those organizing drives of labor from back in those times. So racism is anti-working class. But one of the things that people don't understand is that the working class is actually in a situation where right now, between the behavior of the Fed and just general corporate, unbridled corporate greed, the working class is probably 45% behind where they should be in real wages. So you're making $70,000, you're making $80,000, but you can't do anything good with that money, right? So even though you're saying, somebody goes, oh, well, most of Trump's supporters are making $75,000 a year. Whoop-de-doo. That person should be making $125,000 a year. So that pressure on their lifestyle, because remember now, they're growing up in a country that taught them that being white gave them this leg up. And I'm looking around and I don't have that leg up anymore. Matter of fact, I'm looking around and none of us have a leg up. But what happened? They're not seeing that my leg is not up. They're not looking at the Latino making $70,000 and seeing that he or she, their leg is not up. They're just looking at themselves because they live in this world that tells them I'm the only thing that counts. But the fact is that the working class has been under the duress of the Fed and unbridled capitalism. That is what's causing this tension. And labor has been unable to articulate or refuses to articulate. I think they even might know about it, what it is that's going on. But if you're in certain unions, that racism works to your advantage.
And the pandemic has exacerbated the contradictions for working people, for poor people, Black people, and it also has, as you've said, increased the wealth of the billionaires massively. Yet, what's happening in capitalism, isn't that what the Democratic Party and the Republicans are both about? Maintaining capitalism, maintaining the right of capital to exploit and profit from things like the pandemic?
Well, I mean, they certainly have bought in and bought in deeper and deeper every day, right? So it seems to me, and certainly there is some pressure now coming from the so-called squad and what have you like that, but that pressure is building up. There is actually real pressure to change. Uh, people talk about a guaranteed income. People talk about $15 an hour. The fact of the matter is that as a society, because if you went to Mississippi right now and implemented a state minimum wage of $15 an hour, those people would just be less poor, but they'd still be poor. So we need to identify, what do we mean by a living wage, because a living wage is different in California, New York, Connecticut, so forth, than it is in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, right? So we need to identify what it is and then implement that. And you're going to see, when you start to do those things, it opens, because people start to feel a little easier about their lifestyle, and you can have a better conversation. I'm telling you, in my local union, which is actually predominantly white, we have easily half of them are dyed in the wool Trump supporters. And I can tell you that there are those guys, there are some of them that are, no question that they have real racist tendencies, but there's quite a few of them who I would never call racist. I mean, I even have a hard time being mad at them because they're actually nice guys. So somehow, whatever it is that he represents, they find attractive. And labor needs to find out what that is and start to counteract that in real, meaningful ways to get their attention back onto the union.
But really, how can you do that with the Democrats? And that raises the question of Bezos and Amazon. I mean, Bezos, the way he systemically violates health and safety regulations at his warehouses, the way he doesn't pay any taxes, the way that he and the other billionaires basically run roughshod, and yet the Democrats aren't really for putting him in jail for his criminal violations. I mean, they handle him with kid gloves. You think that the Democrats are actually going to put the billionaires in jail when they violate the laws, when they steal from people, when they steal from pensions, using the laws that they've written? You're going to change that with the Democratic Party?
No, but I'll tell you what would be a cure. When the labor movement starts to build an independent working class party, a labor party, a real independent workers party that they support, that workers support. See, right now, the Democratic Party is supported by capitalist money. The Republican Party is supported by capitalist money. And in some cases, the same guy is giving both of them money, right? So they're never going to leave those jobs, right? I'm making 200,000. When they kick me out of here, I go to work for MSNBC or Fox or whomever. They're not going to do anything. So labor has to go back and start to invest with its membership, right? With its rank and file. See, we have deserted our rank and file, and we started to put our hands into the hands of the Democratic Party, forgetting that it wasn't the Democratic Party or the Republican Party that gave us what we want. It is the militancy of the rank and file that actually gained for the working class what it is that we have.
And this threat of Amazon, I just saw that Amazon signed a contract with Zim to ship cargo from China to Amazon warehouses around the world. Amazon now is a real threat to UPS and the Teamsters. How do you see the Teamsters and unions confronting this albatross now, Amazon, which threatens unionized carriers like UPS and also threatens to do to urban areas what Walmart has done to rural areas, and that is to destroy small businesses, wipe out small businesses.
Oh, absolutely. So they have to take on Amazon globally. You ain't going to beat Amazon trying to organize in Alabama, trying to organize in New York. This has to be, and this is going to take the collective effort. The 8-hour day is a collective global effort. People forget that, there were 8-hour leagues, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. In France, which is a highly developed union country, right? With a militant union background, Amazon is a minimum wage worker over there, right? So we have to start to talk to port workers in various countries, truckers in various countries, people who are dealing with the ports in various countries, and say, we ain't gonna offload anything on Zimline that belongs to Amazon, right? We're going to have to start a global organizing in which we can affect them, not just in Bessemer, Alabama, but all over the world, right? Because that's what it's going to take. But in fact, it's also going to take, because the Democrat ain't going to do it, and the Republican ain't going to do it, because they have some cohesive relationships, right? It is going to take the militancy of workers recognizing that $15 an hour ain't gonna cut it if you want to have a vacation, if you want to give your kids something, right? You're going to need something more than that. And we have to get those workers who are quote unquote doing well, we have to get them back into the fight.
And in this fight at Bessemer in Alabama, the Southern Workers Assembly called for solidarity actions throughout the country. There were over 50 rallies on March 20th and February, and yet the AFL-CIO did not support those, did not encourage labor councils and unions to get behind the fight against Amazon nationally. And their whole thing is the ProAct. We'll pass the ProAct and that will save labor. This whole perspective that an election is going to organize Amazon and going to the NLRB is going to organize Amazon is not historically the way that labor is organized. In the 30s and 40s, it did it by mass mobilization, occupation surrounding factories, warehouses, by mass action. You think that's what's going to take today to really organize companies like Amazon?
Absolutely. Listen, I'm just going to use a sports analogy. Name me a team that won the Super Bowl that did not have three decent things happening at the same time: a good running game, a good passing game, and good defense. If you don't have all of these three, that's how we built the movement, right? We have to go back to those things that got us here. We don't we have forgot. We playing run and gun being playing with the Democratic Party or playing with the Republican Party. We have to get back to militant global action if we're going to force, because they're not going to change on their own. We have to force them to change. And what do I mean by that? Labor has to start to build, because you don't do this overnight, the movement for I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this in a real terms, and I'm not saying this in any kind of cockamamie way. A global general strike that on May 1st, 2022, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Japan, in South Korea, in India, throughout the world, on May 1st of 2022, may take longer, maybe it's 2023, that we're going to have a shutdown. And every worker, UPS, FedEx, whomever, we are not moving a train, a plane, or nothing until you do these 5 demands that we have right here. And that's what is going to push the capitalists, because right now, when they were building the EU, right, and unifying these countries in the European Union, they were countries whose wage scales were too low, right? I could think of Portugal as one of them, right? And if my memory is correct, a guy says, listen, if you want to join on June 16th, on June 15th, all them guys got to get a 20% wage increase to bring them up to what we consider to be European standards. So in the United States, through the Fed and the government, they could give every worker a 45% increase in pay. And Jeff Bezos would still be a billionaire. And Warren Buffett would still be a billionaire. And Bill Gates would still be a billionaire. But the working class would have moved 10 inches from the precipice.
And we're speaking with Chris Silvera. He's president of IBT808 in New York, New Jersey. The other issue is the rising xenophobia, attack on Asians, Asian Americans, and blaming China as the main enemy, blaming Russia. it seems that it's a bipartisan policy of both the Democrats and Republicans to say that the problems in the United States are caused by China, and that we have a threat. In fact, some of the Democrats were complaining about they need unity with the Republicans to fight China. This whole effort to go on the offensive against China, and yet China itself is investing in like Namibia and taking over the economies. How do workers in the United States have to look at this campaign to pivot, the Asian pivot, turn to China and try to encircle China, or for that matter, encircle Russia?
So capitalists have always been competitive with each other. I'm sure that General Motors was competitive against Mercedes-Benz, and Volkswagen was trying to sell more cars than Ford, and that's a reality of the game that they play. But this idea that China is somehow undermining the United States, every factory that's in China was brought to China from the United States. So you can bring your factories back to America if you believe what you believe, but you're not doing that. So it's a sham thing to have the working class vilifying this imaginary enemy when the capitalist does not have an enemy, because they intend, through these different trade agreements, NAFTA, PNTR, people forget a thing called a General Agreement on Trade and Tariff called GATT, which is the foundation of all these other things. This is capitalism trying to defeat the workers on a global scale. What did Jack Welch, who is called the godfather of the CEOs in America, he was supposed to be the Don of Dons of the CEOs. He was asked, where's the best place to build a factory? And he said, on a barge. And the guy says, a barge? What are you talking about? He says, I could move it from country to country. Wherever I could get the cheapest labor, that's where I'm moving my factory to. So they're having the workers believing that they're in some kind of battle with China. They're not in any battle with China. They're in a battle trying to defeat the working class, not only in the United States, but also in Europe, right? Because we are the high wage workers, right? Canada, United States, Germany, what have you. People talk about, oh, buying a German car. A German worker is much better compensated than the average United States worker. People don't notice. And most Americans don't travel. So they have no clue to the lifestyle. You see the point I'm saying? And the American Union buys in because they have now become junior partners of the Democratic Party. Some of them the Republican Party. They're less junior, they're not even junior partners there, they're just associates. And, and they're trying to get along when what they need to be doing is educating the American worker to what the real issues are. And the real issue is not China, the real issue is global capitalism.
Yeah, but it seems like for example, General Motors is selling more cars in China than in the United States. They're making big profits in China. Tesla is making big profits in China. So the American companies, as you were saying, were the ones that went to China to make profits in China.
That's right. You're talking about 1.3 billion people, right? They're middle class. They're identified as middle class in China. It's 300 million people. That's the total population of the United States, right? That's where the new profit center is. So we're going to China to do business. We're selling refrigerators. We're selling cars. Mercedes-Benz is building factories there. And this is what I'm talking about, the globalization. In the meantime, they have the American guy thinking about Kung flu and China virus and all this bogus foolishness, and totally diverted from what the real actions that are causing them to live and suffer the way they are.
But you're saying something which the unions, the head of the Teamsters, the head of the AFL-CIO should have been saying in counter to Trump, that this attack on China was a xenophobic attack, and also it was going to lead to attack on Asians and Asians Americans in this country. It had a direct relationship to what happens to Asians, blacks, and others. I mean, this rise of racism and xenophobia.
Oh, absolutely.
Because part of the system, part of capitalism. Blame blacks, blame browns, blame immigrants.
Yes, because you're trying to isolate one group. These other guys, they lived through hell already, right? So Africans in America don't know anything else but hell from 1619 right up until today. Has not changed. Has it gotten better? You know, but it's still bad, right? They want the white worker to hate them. And I give people a story. Pick a year prior to the end of the Civil War. There are 10 carpenters on a plantation. 5 are white, 5 are Africans. The 5 white guys are getting $1 a day. The 5 black guys are working for room and board. The 5 white guys had not gotten a raise of pay in 10 years. They get pissed, they get angry, they go into the boss. Boss, it's been 10 years, ain't got a raise of pay. Come on, you got to do something. The boss points to the 5 black guys, the 5 enslaved Africans, and says, you see them 5 guys? They're doing the same work you're doing. They're just as good as you are. So I tell you what, why don't you leave my office right now? You ain't getting no raise, and be careful that I don't replace you with 5 more just like them. Those 5 white guys leaving the boss's office are not mad at the boss. They're mad at the 5 enslaved Africans that have no control over their destiny. This has worked for hundreds of years. And until the leaders of the labor movement stop playing along, right? I tell workers, I said, do you think that, in Mexico, when the electricity goes out, they send to New York for 10 Irish electricians in the IBW to come down there and fix it? I said, you got electricians all over the world. I says, and until the labor movement here gets a global perspective, right? And start to realize that there is a battle between capital and labor, right? But not just capital and labor, capitalists, right? And labor. And until they start to articulate that argument, every worker that I've talked to in my local, I'm talking to Trumpsters and what have you, if you gave them a workers' party, would leave the Democrat Republican Party and join the Workers' Party. So there's someone in those parties that's telling the labor leaders, do not do this, right? Just think of the Million Worker March, right? What did they go and do? Oh, it's not the right time. We got to focus on John Kerry. John Kerry loses the election, and the following year, the AFL breaks up. So could you tell me again when was the right time? You see, but Million Worker March, even though we didn't have 1 million people in Washington, D.C., actually has spawned a lot of activities since that time.
This mobilization of labor that you're talking about, I mean, having forcing the capitalists to provide better conditions, better wages, would seem to require a mass mobilization of labor, mass rallies. Yet there have been no mass workers' rallies in Washington. There have been no major mobilizations, including even supporting the Amazon workers or supporting the Nissan workers who are trying to organize in the South. There wasn't a national effort for everyone to go out and back these workers up, back themselves up.
That is true, but guess what they're doing, right? And this is no knock to my good brother. He's a good friend of mine. Well, he's not a good friend of mine, but I know him, and I like him, and I appreciate the work that he does on behalf of working people. But instead of a national mobilization, we send for an actor to come and speak. Good actor, good speaker, an activist, a militant brother. However, where was that we needed a mass mobilization. We didn't need Danny Glover. We needed 10,000 Teamsters here. We needed 10,000 electricians here. We needed 10,000 carpenters here. And this is what's going to turn them around. So as long as we're going to play with Danny Glover, the capitalist is going to kick back and say, good to see you. Matter of fact, you need to borrow my jet. You can have it.
But isn't that a dangerous thing to the structure? If you started to bring 10,000 carpenters, 10,000 Teamsters, 10,000 auto workers together, and you start really going out there in the streets and starting to make noise and show your power, that can threaten a lot of people, not just the bosses and the owners, but also the union bureaucracy.
Well, absolutely. So if you're not going to deal with this, as a matter of fact, the workers might have to start to do things on their own, right? But the fact is that these guys know. And if you're a businessman and you're a union businessman, your business is the union. Your business ain't Amazon. Your business is getting more dues and getting more members and all of this kind of foolishness, right? So if you're not going to tend to but the fact is that these union businessmen are tending to some other guy's business. And the workers feel this. This is why there's a disconnect. This is why they don't care. This is why they don't come out. The day you put a bus together and say, well, Nissan and them is gone now, but just say the Nissan factory, that movement, and says, I got 5 buses that we're gonna take to go down to Mississippi, right?
Or Nissan dealerships around the country, or Toyota dealerships. I mean,
No, we got
Delta,
to go.
when they're
We
trying
got
to
to go
organize.
to the point of production and put. If you had 50,000 people surrounding that plant, they'd have to shoot everybody to get to work that day. Okay, so there's a way to stop production. You have to stop production, right? Because if you go to the dealership, the car's already there, right? You have to stop production. You have to say to the worker, listen, I know you can afford to buy a new car next year, but hold off on that car. Hold off for 1 year. I know your car good enough. You only got 50,000 miles on it. You're just making enough money to flip it. Just hold off for 1 year. If we start to make our money work, we don't need Amazon Prime. I got it. You don't want to go to the mall. They might blow up the mall. You got all kind of crazy people shooting you. You don't need Prime. You do not need the sneakers on Sunday. You're not playing in the basketball playoff. You do not need these sneakers tomorrow. You can wait 3 days. It is that's causing these workers to have to run more. Let me tell you a little quick story. Right outside this building, there were 2 Amazon vans blocking the street. Some out there says, "Hey guys, it's a public thoroughfare. You can't just block up the street. That is, what the hell is wrong with you, right? You guys work for Amazon." Not only did they not work for Amazon, the individuals in each of those 2 vans on the same street in Long Island City work for 2 different employers. All of these things is done with the mindset of keeping the union out, right? So the union has to attack the biggest one, but it can't do it, in Bessemer, Alabama. It has to do this on a global scale. We're not unloading anything going to Amazon. We're not unloading anything on that goddamn Zim line, right? We need to actually be sending some letters to the Chinese embassy to say, wait a minute, if you're a communist government, how do you allow a company to be in Namibia treating people like this? Right? I thought you was a communist. What kind of communist are you? But you really not a communist anymore. You done gave up on that. You just call yourself communist, but you ain't communist no more. You playing right along with Bezos and them, and you're all in the same party, because this is a global movement to destroy the labor movement, because it's the labor movement that keeps workers' wages up. And if they can destroy that by moving jobs in other places and destroying the foundations in Europe and the United States, we're all going to be in poverty wages in 20 years.
And that you have the anti-labor laws like Taft-Hartley, which prevent solidarity boycotts, what they call secondary boycotts. It prevents workers from backing each other up, as they did in the 30s, to be successful. But also in New York, you have the Taylor Law, state law in New York, which prevents public workers from striking. Yet you have the Democrats in control, as you do have the Democrats in control of California, yet these anti-labor laws are still in place. And it doesn't seem, for example, in New York, there's any real fight to say, we get this Taylor Law out, or we're going to challenge the Taylor Law directly by worker action.
Not going to ask for it, because they're all a part of the game. And the workers, let me tell you something. When you look at voter turnout in local union elections, you realize that the workers are disconnected. Some people think they're satisfied. I'm not really sure they're satisfied. I just don't think that they think they can change things. So you don't have public sector unions making a demand. I'm not going to support anybody for governor. I'm not going to support anyone for this assembly or any position that is not going to do on day one, within the first 100 days, as they like to say, removing the Taylor law and unleashing my capacity to gain a better outcome. They have bought in. It works for them, right? I'm making my money. I got I can park anywhere because they give me a little placket. I can park anywhere I want to park. They even give me a little flashing light. I could jet around the city and what have you like that. So they got this, right? They could pick up the phone and call the governor, blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff like that. They have disconnected themselves from the working class. And it's not hard, right? Because there's enough steak and bacon and what have you to entice you to forget what it is you came here to do. But the workers have to rise up. The workers have to mobilize. But these leaders also have to realize that if they don't start mixing this pot, there is not going to be a pot. There is not going to be a labor movement. You're not going to get that steak anymore. You're not going to get that bacon anymore. That lobster fondue or whatever, out the window.
And it seems with the financial situation, speculation, the cryptocurrency, they don't see a value of anything. People are putting their money totally in speculation, that the danger of another financial collapse is growing actually in the world and in the United States.
I'd hate to tell you how many rank and file members are playing cryptocurrency. I walk around in my shops and I hear guys, I'm like, what? And you know, so a quick story. So many years ago, one of my mentors was a guy named Phil Feaster, local 639 in Washington, D.C. And I was new to the labor movement, 1990. And we were at this conference in South Carolina. And he was lamenting 401ks. 401ks was relatively new at the time. And so I was like, you know, I'm a young guy, I knew very little. And I said, what's this battle about 401k? I mean, what's the big deal? And he says, it's going to let our members think that them and the bosses have something in common, buying and selling stock. And I have lived to see workers willing to give up a defined benefit pension plan to take a 401k. I've watched that. So the workers are uneducated. The workers need to be educated. The labor movement, Steve, you should be on MSNBC. MSNBC after certain hours simply repeats all the shows that was there the night before. If you can't afford the 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, I got it. But you had $60 million for Barack Obama. You had $60 million for Joe Biden. You had 60. You can buy 1 hour on TV every night. You should be on Sirius Radio talking to all these truckers all over the country every day about what the interest of the working class is.
And the idea of a channel, of a 24-hour labor channel, international labor channel that deals with the workers in China, Namibia, South Africa, Korea, isn't that what we need to link up internationally to get the stories out so all workers are aware their brothers and sisters around the world face the same issues as they do?
See, that's what I talk about not traveling. The worker here is not traveling. He don't know nothing. He go to South Carolina, he go down to Myrtle Beach with his little motorcycle and he think he done went someplace. Has no clue about, and that's, so let me back up. Because I have to thank guys like you, Steve, because you bring these things to people's attention. There are things I find out from the emails and the stuff I get from you, from Alan Benjamin and so forth like that, right? People don't know that this is happening globally. 1991, I believe it was 91, there was was one of the last times the AFL had a big rally in Washington, D.C. And locally, I was new. I'd been in office now about a year. And we got 5 buses that we took to Washington, D.C. One of the big issues was healthcare, right? Those workers, for the first time, understood that the problem wasn't an 808 problem, that we all had a problem. Because they went down there and saw 200,000 people, or however was there, with these signs that told them this, right? So we need to have a channel that's bringing in information from South Africa, from Australia, from South Korea, from all over the world, so that workers here begin to understand, you ain't the only guy with a problem. Bezos is screwing me in France. This guy's screwing me in Namibia. This guy's screwing me over here. And when they understand that, then the racism is going to fall to the wayside, because now they're going to see themselves as a part of the labor movement from a global perspective.
And that, of course, is the power really to stop capitalism globally, confront it, and unite all working people together around the same issues.
Around the same issue, absolutely. Absolutely. And this doesn't happen until we globalize and make people begin to realize you're not in this by yourself.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Chris Silvera, president of IBT808 in New York and New Jersey, and this struggle is obviously going to continue. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for what you do, Steve. Keep up the work, man.